Hello, welcome to my review of the first official studio album by Irish recording artist Enya. And of course, this is not technically her first album. She released a self-titled album in March of 1987 with lots of music that she created for the BBC documentary The Celts. But as far as her first commercially successful album where she went in, actually into the studio for Warner Music and created like an actual body of 11 songs. This was like her first album, and it did carry the flagship single, which gave her worldwide success, Orinoco Flow. This album is called Watermark. It was released on September 19th, 1988. It's almost 30 years old, and it still holds up beautifully 30 years later. And that's one of the things that is so timeless about this record. And it has an appeal that has made it sell incredibly well. This album was a international success unlike anything that the three of them, Enya, Nikki, Ryan, and Roma Ryan, her lyricist and her producer, could possibly be expecting, or her label, Warner Music, at the time either. This was a complete shock and surprise to all of them because it was just like this very introspective and different music, not like anything you would ever hear on the radio, not like anything that anyone had ever been really doing at the time. And yet it captured the hearts of so many different people all around the world. It's a miracle in some ways. And of course, it carries the big song that almost everyone knows, Orinoco Flow, although as a lot of people tend to call it Sail Away because that's actually the main lyric that she repeats over and over in the chorus. It was a huge radio single smash hit. And it was the song that put Enya into the, almost mainstream in that regard. And it is her most successful single. Behind, I think only Time was just a little bit more successful, which was a single that she released about 12 years later. So let's get into this record. Watermark is the foundation record for Enya's sound. She was experimenting for the first time with Nicky Ryan, her producer, and he was a big fan of Phil Spector and the Beach Boys, this wall of sound idea using synthesizers and vocal overlays of her voice recorded over and over to create her voice as an instrument. So this shows a lot more experiment in that regard, although they did do that on the Celts record, which was then called Enya. The Celts was re-released in 1992. The image and the theme of this album, as Enya has talked about, it speaks a lot about yearning to return to somewhere, to begin a journey back home, or to also possibly want to journey away from where you have been. The theme of oceans, the theme of heartache, the theme of exile, the theme of longing to return somewhere are huge prevalent themes on this record. And there's also some historical themes in terms of dealing with colonization, dealing with, for instance, how the Vikings invaded Ireland, all of these people traveling and voyaging to different islands and claiming lands. All of these things are tied into the framework of all of Enya's music, but particularly this album. The album's title track, Watermark, is a beautiful piano instrumental. I will say this, and I don't feel like it is a stretch. I think it is probably the most beautiful piano instrumental song, definitely that Enya has ever released, but possibly that I have ever heard from any pianist, to be completely honest. You can do amazing things on the piano, amazing, really fast sonatas that just dizzy you with how fast they move their hands across the keyboard. Enya doesn't play the piano like that. It's very slow and steady and deliberate, but there's a rhythm and flow to it that is so captures the imagination. It's very thought out and methodical. But, who would have thought that that would be so the opposite of what you would assume it would be? It's not methodical in how it inspires and conjures up imagery in the imagination. This title track, I remember I first listened to it, gosh, it was like probably when I was around 5 years old, and my parents had the Paint the Sky with Stars compilation album, which had just been released at that time. And this song, Watermark, as well as Orinoco Flow, and The Storms in Africa, that song, were all on this record. So I was introduced to these three songs long before I actually heard anything else on the album, which was actually not until about 2012. I was really behind actually in that. So I heard a lot of songs really early on, and then I didn't hear the rest of the record until I was almost 20 years old, which is kind of crazy. But that's just how my journey with Enya has been. And so it's so fitting, obviously, to intro to lead you into this record. It sets the tone for not only this album, but for all of Enya's discography. It truly just captures the longing in the heart of someone who wants to, in my interpretation, understand the passage of time, understand the flow and rhythm of life. You know, the song is called Watermark, and it was inspired by a poem that Roma Ryan, her lyricist, had been working on. They decided not to include any lyrics in the final result, resulting in it being just a piano ballad instrumental with some vague sort of soft oohs and ahs recorded by Enya that just add the ambiance, that just makes you feel so swelled up. It's an extremely melancholy track. I mean, almost all of Enya's piano ballads are. And that's what's so tear jerking about it. It's got so much pain to it. It feels like someone looking back and reflecting on their life, on their childhood, on days gone by that they cannot reclaim. And it really makes you feel as though you reflect on your own life. And it always reminds me of my childhood. And I mean, I also beautifully listened to it when I was first a child. It kind of would, it's sort of like a lullaby. It kind of, I was in the car and I would kind of just fall asleep to songs like this. And of course, I mean, they touched me then. I knew that they were beautiful, but they didn't touch me like they do now, obviously. And so that connection and through line that I have with Enya's music is part of what makes it so magical and special to me. Enya's music is part of my childhood and growing up. Something that Enya's music addresses, it deals with the ephemeral nature of memory and almost how childhood can become like a dream to the adult who's reflecting back on it. It's like so far removed and so far away, but there was an innocence and a beauty to it that at the time you don't realize you're living, but looking back, you'll spend so much time longing and thinking about those good, beautiful days as a child when the world was so much more full of wonder and everything was new. And so Watermark carries also a very adult theme of just, you know, reflecting possibly as an elderly person on romance and on love. All of these things tie into it, but it's just a simple 2-minute melody that carries all this weight. And it's a very simple song. I kind of can play it on the piano, which is really difficult because I did play the piano, but I am not an excellent pianist by any means. But songs like these are a little easier to learn because they don't, you know, have they're not too up tempo. They're, you know, they don't have a ton of chord changes. It's such a simple melody, and, you know, she does this every time. Simple, 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 but piercingly beautiful. I will always love this song. I also just researching and for this album, I found out an interesting bit of information. Enya actually met Princess Diana of Wales, obviously when she was alive, and apparently, Diana actually told Enya that Watermark was one of her personal favorite songs. I'm not entirely sure if she actually meant maybe the whole entire album or if she was just talking about this song. But oh my gosh, I mean, can you imagine Princess Diana telling you that? And also the fact that Diana loved this song just makes me like love Diana so much more. And, you know, a lot of people do. I mean, my mom loves this song. It's just such an inspiring, cross generational, heartfelt melody that just is, it's like the theme song to Enya's music. All right, I spent a lot of time talking about Watermark, but that's just because it's the highlight song on this record for me. The next song, Cursum Perficio, means watermark in Latin, I think, in some form. And this song has Latin lyrics, which is a new territory for her at the time, but is something she will repeatedly do later on in further records, that is really different in sound than Watermark. And it's kind of funny because I didn't hear this song until I was, you know, a lot older. And Watermark had already been, you know, in my brain for so long. The fact that this song follows Watermark in the album chronology is a little just disconcerting to me now. But it does fit. This song has a very dire and urgent feel to it. It's got these strong choral motifs to it that make Enya really feel like she's actually a part of a huge church choir who are singing this song. And it's sort of reminiscent of Ennio Morricone when they did the Mission soundtrack and they had these vocal choral groups and they had them doing these sort of chamber-filling bombastic melodies that just rose and fell. It's a very Latin church song. It's sort of an intro to a little bit more of a ritualistic and sort of haunting side of Enya that she portrays in further records, where she kind of comes off as making like chamber choral music that's brooding and dark and mysterious. The next song, On Your Shore, complete change of gears here. We're going to a very beautiful ballad like song here. This song is full of heartache and sorrow for someone who's passed away. This song was inspired by this beach in Ireland in County Donegal, where she is from, Gweedore, and her grandparents' graves are on this beach or nearby, and it carries so much weight. You know, Enya's very hushed and refined, and there's just one little synthesizer backing. But she's singing about, you know, to me, it also signifies, you know, like possibly a love where you describe it as being washed upon a foreign shore. Strange that my heart beats to find myself upon your shore. Strange that I've come here. I never thought I would wash up on your beach, but here I am, and I feel so many things about this, you know. So it carries all of these meanings through the metaphor of shore and ocean, and this is sort of where that theme of water and oceans being metaphors really first becomes implied throughout the album with some of these big sort of ballad-like songs. It has a beautiful clarinet solo that just is simple and unhurried, reflective tone, and it fits very well into the sound of the song. We come to a song, Storms in Africa, which was a single off of this album. Songs like this are kind of some of the more exciting songs for me about Enya. These are songs where you could tell that she was truly embodying experimentation. You know, here you have a woman who's always lived in Ireland singing about, it's actually kind of interesting. I actually thought when I listened to Enya back when I was 5 years old in the car, 5, 6, I actually wasn't sure what ethnicity Enya was. I mean, first of all, I could not understand, especially as a little kid, much of what she was saying, so it was really hard for me to tell. I knew she was singing in English, but I also knew she was singing in a ton of other languages that I never heard. And so I couldn't tell. I thought maybe she could have been an African woman, you know, or maybe I thought she was Spanish. I was very kind of confused as to her ethnicity. And of course, I didn't actually really see pictures of Enya until I was a bit older. So that kind of aura of mystery of her where she was from was also fueled by the fact that she had songs like Storms in Africa that I heard when I was very little. This song, if I didn't know anything else about Enya, I would think this was sung by someone like a Nigerian woman. You know, this song is, I mean, it has a vocal approach that she has that's very youthful, and you hear Enya's tone, but you also hear sort of this very feminine sort of, I almost want to say like sound of nature kind of voice that carries through so beautifully. And of course, she does turn her voice into an instrument. She mimics the sounds of the synthesizers with her own voice during a lot of the sort of ambient pre-chorus parts of the song. And then of course, during the actual verse and chorus, she sort of soars with this either English or Gaelic melody. She recorded the song in both languages. The song builds and builds and builds with these beautiful drums in the background that then kind of gather real momentum, and it feels like a storm is coming on. The song is basically referencing how storms can roll across these vast savannas and these vast plains of Africa or some other more kind of deserted area, and the power and majesty of it. It's an ode to Mother Nature in a lot of regards. And it has an Aboriginal feel to it. It has an indigenous sort of heart to it. And it feels as though like someone like a Native American tribe would sing this when the storms came, when the rain was supposed to fall. It's a very unique song for her because she doesn't always go in that territory of doing something so experimental, so culturally explorative, so, you know, varied in its approach and its sound, and so unique from any other song that she's really ever done. And for that, I applaud it. I mean, this is the kind of experimentation that I really would love to see Enya somewhat return to with her music. It's still there in certain pieces. She's always experimenting, but this was a completely new approach to creating sort of like the soundtrack to a thunderstorm. Sort of in the lyrics, there's also sort of still this message of journeying because she's talking about, says, "How far will I go? I cannot say. How many more will journey this way?" So she's bridging the sort of idea of a thunderstorm moving along this terrain and likening it metaphorically to a journey of a person. This again, this allusion between water and movement and geography. It feels so emotional, and the tie-in is just so it is so beautifully put. There's not much more I can say, but it eloquently describes imagery conducing way the sort of journey again, traveling across great distances. The song Exile has a extremely mournful, reflective tone. It's almost like a lament. You imagine someone like her singing it on a mountain, aching to return back to where she once was. You know, it's called Exile, so it talks about someone who is banished and can never come back home, like a warrior on a mountain, you know, who must live on his own or find a new path, find a new place to live. Cold as the northern winds in December mornings, cold as the cry that rings from this far distant shore. Winter has come too late, too close beside me. How can I chase away all these fears deep inside? I'll wait the signs to come. I'll find a way. I will wait the time to come. I'll find a way home. My light shall be the moon, and my path the ocean, my guide the morning star, as I sail home to you. So there's this promise of reuniting, that even though time and space and circumstance has torn us apart so tragically, I will return to you. And this theme returns in all of these different metaphors that she alludes to water and oceans and sailing across and the seasons, you know, how winter comes, turns to spring and summer, how we go through these cycles. And so the journey is never ending in that regard. The song for me, it's something you would sing in the most forlorn and sort of desperate moment upon the mountain when you feel as though all hope is lost. And for me, it has sort of that feeling of someone like a warrior or you know, just someone who's traveled and done so much, but misses what gave, you know, the person that gave them everything, and now it's so cold, you know, here without them. It's a love song, but it's also so much more than that. It has these beautiful Uilleann pipes, which is this Irish Scottish instrument that they employ in this song as well as in later songs on the record as well. And this song also appeared in several films in the early 90s, so it obviously carries into the cinematic world really well. Then we have a nice little piano ballad called Miss Clare Remembers. Now, this is basically, she has one song on Shepherd Moons that is also sort of the sister song to this. This is just a nice sort of simple piano melody she composed based off of a novel by this woman, this British novelist, Miss Reed, who writes about just sort of simple country life and people working together in a rural setting. And she's just always inspired by sort of the childlike sort of imagination of these stories. And so she wrote this song inspired by a chapter from that book. And it's just a nice sort of familial, it has a charm to it that makes you think of just sort of like pastoral day to day life. And it reflects on that. And all of this music is so reflective. So it's still a very beautiful sort of interlude piece. But then we come to the song, Orinoco Flow. This was the song that literally catapulted her to success beyond anything she could have possibly ever imagined. This song is essentially about the beginning of a journey. It's something like if you're about to set sail, you would sing this like triumphantly, like I'm going to travel to all of these places. I'm going to experience all of these things. It's inspired, the title Orinoco is a river in Venezuela. It's kind of a little bit part of the Amazon, and it's one of the many places that she name drops in this song all over the world. She talks about Libya, she talks about the Yellow Sea, Bissau, Palau, Avalon, which is a fictional place. So it's kind of interesting. She tries these all together. Fiji, Isles of Ebony, Peru, Cebu, the Philippines, Babylon, Bali, Coral Sea, Khartoum. And then she also references all of these places like Island of the Moon, the Sea of Clouds, all of these places that are just like these either mystical, magical, fictional, or real places that are part of the conjuring of the imagination of all the landscapes that she will traverse. In my experience, in my understanding of like where her music is going to go, her music, it feels very geographically sort of diverse. And so she travels to all these different places in her sounds and in her soundscapes. And so this song is sort of like an intro to explore the exploration that her music is going to take. It's one of those songs, it's actually very different from the rest of the Watermark album. It's much more upbeat, it's much more up tempo. It has all of these pizzicato chords. It's got a waltzy sort of feel. It's definitely a song that could suit very well to like a ballet or a waltz type of dance. It is very synthesizer heavy, but with some pop music sentiments with some beats and stuff, which really makes it unique for the rest of Watermark because everything else is very slow with minimal synthesizer use and maybe some choral stuff, but that's about it, where it's instrumental. So this song is completely different, and it was the last song recorded for the album, and you can kind of tell because they had all the other stuff. It was like written, and it was a thing. It was like a story, and then they threw this song in the middle, and they were like, "What the heck? This is an experimental song. We had a lot of fun recording it." Little did they know that it would be this song that launched everything, and of course, it made this album so well selling. It is again, it's not my absolute favorite Enya song, but it is one of those classics that you cannot just help respect and just know. I mean, it changed pop music in a lot of ways. Um, the sound, Enya's sound, becomes a little bit more popular in like hip hop music, and it transforms pop culture. I don't know. I think it's a transformative song for pop culture. It's been used in lots of different ads, and lots of different films have used it, and it's like a staple of the late '80s and experimentation with synthesizer work and with rhythmic radio, all of these things. And again, she repeats, "Let me wash upon your shore." So she's talking again about like, let me explore these new avenues and worlds, metaphorically describing them as beaches, which is again shore to shore, a very big theme throughout the record. Next, we have this song, Evening Falls. This is a very timid song. It's hushed and refined and sparse. This song was actually inspired by like a ghost story that I think Roma was inspired or heard of about this abandoned building, and sort of told through the perspective of a ghost. You know, as the evening falls, as the daylight is fading, from within me calls. Could it be I am sleeping? For a moment I stray, then it holds me completely. Close to home, I cannot say. Close to home, feeling so far away. As I walk the room, there before me a shadow from another world where no other can follow. Carry me to my own, to where I can cross over. Close to home, I cannot say. Close to home, feeling so far away. You know, the feeling of possibly feeling a presence and then exploring what it means to pass into the next life. All of these things are explored on this song. It actually features a little bit of an organ sound, so it gives it also some hymn kind of qualities to it, like a church hymn. Because it has that sort of steady delivery and tempo. The next song, River, is another more experimental instrumental where it's very heavy synthesizer work with a little bit of beat. It conjures up imagery of a river. The way the MIDI synths sort of flow and come back and forth. I mean, looking back on it now, I do kind of wish that maybe a little bit more had been done, but you have to remember that back in the late '80s, synth work was still in its, you know, experimental kind of newfound stage, and it wasn't quite, you know, what we'd see today. So although there's very simple layering and there's not a whole lot going on beyond that, it still is a nice sort of short little interlude song that just again gives you this feeling of movement, of steady movement that's not too hurried, that's patient like the river. So it's not a rushing river, it's not got rapids. It's one of those rivers that, you know, just like you almost can't tell it's moving, but it is. You know, a river that you know of that's big and powerful. It has that, and of course that idea of sailing across it, slow and deliberate. Then we come to the song The Longships, which is another sort of historical allegory song, which talks about and it references the Viking longships. You know, everyone knows those beautiful ships that you can see in like the Norway Museum, the museum in Oslo. There's beautiful longships and these sailors coming to Ireland. Of course, the Vikings did invade Ireland, so this has that this sort of foreign kind of feel to it, like who are these people, why are they coming here? It doesn't necessarily sing it in a bad light because it's somewhat triumphant. The song actually has this sort of triumphant, I'm starting out on this journey, we're this fleet of magnificent oarsmen who are journeying to a new land. It doesn't feel chaotic. It doesn't feel as though a battle is going to commence. It just feels like a tribute to these warriors who traversed all of these oceans and on lands to discover things. And so for me, it takes it beyond the historical context. And even though that was the inspiration, and it is called the Longships, it's not necessarily making me think of the Vikings. It makes me think of Lord of the Rings and, you know, the elves when they would sail in their beautiful ships to Middle Earth, that kind of stuff. It makes me think of that as well. Just people who journeyed, who had no clue where they were going, but just journeyed anyway in these magnificent ships. Again, starts out very soft, builds, and then decrescendos, a lot like Storms in Africa did. Then the final song is the one Gaelic song on this record. She always has to sing a song in her native tongue of Gaelic. Nalatha Giol Moig. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it, but it translates to the bright days of my youth. This song touches my heart so much. Although the melody is not so memorable, and it's one of those songs that I don't necessarily consider in my top favorite Enya songs, it speaks of something that I can relate to so strongly. You know, I can see how someone would lament for the innocence of childhood. Looking back at my youth, I was happy. I was not aware of death then. I was as a child. Now I am sorrowful. Long gone the day. The brighter days of my youth held promise. The way before me held sure destiny. Now I am sorrowful. Long gone the day. I mean, when I first read this translation, it broke me because all of these things I had been thinking in my head. The idea of destiny, and it's portrayed in Disney films as being something so magical that, you know, everyone has all this potential within them. But when you're young, you know, the idealism carries everything you do. But then reality sets in and you realize how cruel this world really is for grown-ups. And I mean, look, we're all fortunate. Enya was very fortunate. I've been very fortunate. I had a beautiful childhood. I had one that had no struggle, no strife whatsoever. The worst thing that could possibly happen is I caught the flu. I mean, I lived the most idyllic childhood that I wish every child could possibly live. And for that, you know, I miss it. I miss it dearly. You know, I'm homesick for childhood. And this song, as a lament, perfectly tributes that. I mean, I often consider myself literally going to a grave as if my grave tombstone is my childhood and like mourning it and as if a funeral. I know that sounds really sad and dark, but I mean, I think a lot of us can relate to this. I mean, childhood could be possibly some of the best days of your life. I know that sounds really sad. I mean, most people say it's much better as a grown up. But I mean, the world is so cruel and full of such suffering. And being a child, everything is so innocent and wondrous. And, you know, the line that really catches me is, I was not aware of death then. Usually, and I mean, I was very fortunate. I didn't have anyone close to me pass away when I was young. I didn't have to experience or understand what death was, that things end, that people leave this earth. And coming to understand that was a real shock to my system, and it threw me into a horrific depression, one that I am still dealing with to this day. And the fact that I knew Enya was also grappling with this, it just made me know that we were very similar in terms of sensitive people who kind of can't help but be afraid of all of these things and how cruel life is, how we feel as though as an adult we're just getting closer and closer to death, and you know, childhood is never going to come back. You know, youth is never going to come back. We're just getting older. It's hard to not feel like anything but decay when you grow up, you know, especially as you get older. And so, I mean, she wrote this as a younger woman still. She's quite young, but it just, I mean, there's nothing else I can really say. It just is the sentiment that speaks to anyone who's lost someone, but anyone who understands how beautiful childhood really is and who really remembers it fondly, and it will always cherish it in their hearts. So I mean, I have to remember and like look to the future in a more positive way, because this song is so mournful, it's so reflective that, you know, Enya's music, it's good for that, but it also does carry like an Orinoco Flow promise for the future. And so that's what I love about her music, is it's all spectrums of perspective. It's looking back, it's being in the moment, and it's looking forward. and it's not just going to keep you, you know, depressed about thinking about one thing. So this is a beautiful song. The album does close with another version of Storms in Africa. This one's a little bit more rhythmic and it features English lyrics. And it ends with a little bit more of a conclusive final drum pound, which I think ends the album out beautifully. Although I do think the original Storms in Africa version 1 is a little bit stronger just because it's a little bit more ambient and soft. All in all, Watermark is a fantastic album. It is not my favorite Enya album. That would have to go to The Memory of Trees, which I have filmed a review on. So I filmed reviews on 2 Enya albums, The Memory of Trees and Dark Sky Island. Both of them I will link in the description box below. I do plan on reviewing all of the rest of her albums, so don't worry, I'm going to get around to it. It's going to be a slow process, but I will get around to it. But I had to start with this album because it just symbolizes everything that is Enya, that is an Enya record sonically, thematically, visually, all of these things. And I mean, who hasn't heard Orinoco Flow? So you all have an experience with this record in some form. It's truly a groundbreaking, iconic record in its subtlety, in its mutedness, but in its promise of so much more. There's such a theme of promises made that will never be broken, journeys that must be taken, futures that must be created, an optimism throughout all the mournful lyrics. And it could be construed as a very mournful record besides Orinoco Flow, but there is a promise of return. There is a promise of a better day tomorrow. And so all of these things come together in such a beautiful way. I am such a huge fan of this record, and I'm a fan of all of Enya's music. I want to know what your experiences were listening to this record for the first time. It just captures you, and yes, it is somber, and it's probably one of her more somber records that she's ever created, barring, of course, Orinoco Flow. It definitely feels so impactful and like a statement piece that, you know, all of the rest of her albums kind of, I don't want to say mimic, but this was the first time she did it, so it kind of holds that authority. Um, so I hope you enjoyed this review. It's hard for me to get my thoughts together on these kind of artists, and you know, I'm trying my best here, but I have so much I could say about Enya's music. I really applaud all of Enya's work, and I'm so glad she got success with this album. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next review. Subscribe if you enjoy listening to these album reviews, and I'll keep doing them. So thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye.